Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Elliott Thorne stood in the center of his living room, an awkward smile frozen on his face. The friends at his 40th birthday party were disturbingly quiet, each trying to avoid making eye contact with him. His wife, Natalie, meanwhile, stood there with a crumpled gift certificate between her slender fingers and a contemptuous smile on her face. "It's your birthday present, honey," she announced, handing him the thin piece of paper, $10 coupon for Starbucks. "After all, that's what you deserve, isn't it?" A mediocre gift to a mediocre person. The air in the room seemed to be drained. Elliott's best friend Marcus frowned while his wife Diana shook her head gently. Elliott carefully took the coupon and noted that it had expired 3 months ago. "Thanks," he said calmly, putting it in his pocket. "I appreciate the mine." Natalie turned magnificently to face their guests and raised her champagne glass. "To Elliott," she blurted out, "my husband, the perpetual middle manager." Her laugh was sharp and piercing, as if she were declaring a secret victory. No one echoed her toast. Elliott silently walks to the kitchen and brings out his handmade birthday cake. His movements were smooth and self-effacing, as if the insults of earlier had never happened. Only he knew that, in his suit pocket, the notification on his cell phone was vibrating, confirming that he'd succeeded in acquiring Meridian Visionaries, the company that Natalie regarded as a mecca and whose entire self-worth had been built on her position as senior marketing director there. What's more, there was her lover, Liam Brooks, the company's chief financial officer. No one knows how Elliott recognized the betrayal. No one knew that the apparently mediocre real estate developer had planned the perfect revenge. His friends saw only a dutiful husband and a humble businessman, never realizing that such deep determination and shrewdness lay beneath his calm exterior. Tomorrow morning, he will walk into that boardroom and announce a decision that will not only fire Liam, but expose his years of financial fraud, as well as shatter Natalie's carefully constructed professional image and her sham of a marriage. Elliott had a tiny, mysterious smile on his face as he cut the first piece of cake. 9 years ago, Elliott and Natalie's stories looked very different. They met at a small startup gathering in Boston. Elliott was in the process of setting up his first major project, converting an abandoned warehouse building into creative office space. Though his suits weren't custom-made and his watches weren't designer, his enthusiasm for talking about architecture and neighborhood revitalization immediately appealed to Natalie. "So you're the kind of guy who turns old buildings into useful spaces?" she asked then, genuine interest sparkling in her blue eyes. "I love discovering the potential in things that have been overlooked," Elliott replied, his eyes scanning the brick walls and exposed pipes of the party venue. "People are always in a rush for something brand new, but sometimes the most valuable things are those that have been around for a long time and just need a new perspective." Natalie is a general marketing associate at Meridian Visionaries, a company specializing in sustainable technology solutions. Her job isn't glamorous, but her passion for the company's mission is real. She admired Elliott's honest approach to his work. He wasn't the type to flaunt around in an expensive suit. Their dates are simple and sincere: dinner at a Seaport District bistro, weekend hikes, picnics at a building Elliott is remodeling, lying on plastic sheets, sharing dreams about the future. Natalie admires his pragmatism and honesty, while Elliott loves her ambition and passion. The wedding was small, but full of meaning, and took place in a small village on the coast of Maine, where Elliott spent his childhood vacations. Natalie's parents were skeptical about her decision to marry a just real estate developer, but Elliott's gentle sense of humor and growing portfolio of projects eventually won them over. "Are you sure this is what you want?" The night before the wedding, Natalie's mother, Patricia, asked her privately. "He seems like a nice guy, but he's not the type to provide you with a lavish lifestyle." Natalie smiled at Elliott, who was talking to her father in the distance. "I don't need luxuries, Mom. I need to be real. Elliott is the most honest and down-to-earth person I have ever met. He builds not just buildings, but communities and futures. That's more valuable than any designer bag or luxury automobile." Patricia nodded as she watched the light in her daughter's eyes. "If he can make you smile from the inside of your heart like that, then I think he's very special indeed." The first few years of their marriage were their happiest. They moved into a modest townhouse in South Boston, not a mansion, but cozy and comfortable, just a few minutes' walk from the beach. On weekend mornings, They often walk along the beach hand in hand, discussing their dreams for the future. Elliott's career gradually took root, focusing on renovating older buildings and revitalizing neglected neighborhoods. He deliberately kept a low profile, avoiding overextension and focusing on meaningful projects rather than pure profit. Meanwhile, Natalie's career at Meridian began to take off. A successful media campaign earned her a promotion, and she then quickly climbed the corporate ladder. When she was promoted to marketing director, she came home with champagne, and they celebrated by dancing on the kitchen floor. "We really did it," she said, tears of excitement glistening in her eyes. "And we all pursued our dreams." Elliott kissed her forehead. "I always believed you could do it." However, as time passes, subtle changes begin to appear. Natalie began to resent their home and felt it was unworthy of her new position. "We should consider moving to Beacon Hill," she suggested at a dinner, "where every executive in the company lives." Elliott frowned. "But we like the neighborhood. We know all the neighbors, and it's close to the beach." "It's just common sense, Elliott." These comments are becoming more frequent. She criticizes his clothes, his car, and even the way he talks. Elliott is confused. His career is actually quite successful. He owns multiple properties, and his portfolio is growing steadily. But the core of his values has always been understatement and pragmatism, not conspicuous consumption. "You need to act more like a successful person," Natalie complained after a company event. "You look like a contractor, not someone who owns their own company." "I'm supposed to be a contractor," Elliott laughed softly. "That's how I got started, and I'm not going to pretend I'm anything else." Natalie rolled her eyes. "That's your problem, Elliott. You have no ambition. We can have more." It was during this time that Natalie began to spend more time in the office. She mentions a new company executive, Liam Brooks, a financial whiz from New York hired to help the company prepare for its IPO. Elliott noticed her eyes light up whenever Liam's name was mentioned. "He's really amazing," she'd say, "and he knows how to succeed in this world." The comments stung Elliott. His success, though not publicly proclaimed, was real. He has quietly built a sizable fortune, but chooses to reinvest most of his income in sustainable, long-term projects rather than live a life of luxury. He struggled to rekindle the spark between them. He planned weekend getaways, prepared elaborate dinners, and even offered to move to a bigger house if that would make her happy. But Natalie always seems distracted, drawn to something Elliott can't see. The change is slow and almost imperceptible. First up were those missed dinners, urgent work meetings, supposedly with Liam and the team to prepare the IPO documents. Then there are those weekend marketing strategy meetings, which strangely enough are always held in luxury hotels, not in offices. Finally, there was the new password set on her cell phone and her habit of quickly flipping the screen whenever Elliott was near. Elliott wasn't stupid, but he didn't want to believe the most obvious explanation either. Deep down, he still loved the girl who had picnicked with him in his half-finished building. The girl who had been so happy for their simple life. Their 5th anniversary was a turning point. Elliott planned an elaborate surprise. He rented out the entire rooftop of the restaurant where they had their first date and decorated it with candlelight and flowers. He booked a famous private chef weeks in advance and even contacted Natalie's college-age roommate to fly in from Chicago as a surprise guest. That night, Natalie walks into the restaurant 2 hours late, reeking of booze and smelling of expensive perfume, a perfume Elliott never bought her. "Sorry," she said vaguely. "Emergency meeting, then client reception." Elliott just nodded, hiding his disappointment behind a smile. "It's okay, the food's still hot." That night, she'd barely touched the carefully prepared dishes and hadn't noticed the special touches or the absence of the surprise guest Elliott had politely asked her to go home first. Natalie looks surprised when he offers to exchange gifts, then chagrinedly admits she forgot their anniversary. "Work was too busy," she argued, "and Liam gave me an important market analysis project that could mean a huge promotion." Elliott handed her a small box containing a handmade necklace with a pendant made from a small piece of masonry from the old warehouse building where they had their first date, set in silver. It's plain," Natalie commented, a forced smile failing to hide her disappointment. In that moment, Elliott saw something change in his wife's eyes. Or perhaps he finally saw the change that had been there for some time. Until one day, a chance discovery makes it all too much to ignore. Elliott and Natalie share a credit card account that is primarily used to track household expenses. While reviewing his monthly bill, Elliott noticed a purchase from the Four Seasons Hotel in Boston on the weekend that Natalie claimed to have participated in a team-building activity. The amount is much higher than a simple business lunch, and the time is on a Saturday night. He could easily accept the explanation, but Elliott's business acumen trained him to look for patterns. He began to look more closely at the bills from the past few months. A clear pattern emerges: late-night dinners at upscale restaurants, always on so-called work nights, hotel rooms all over the city, never reimbursed by the company, and an expensive gift for a man, purchased on the day Natalie claims to be shopping for her mother. Most disturbing of all is the watch, a $20,000 Swiss watch, identical to the one Liam wore to the company party. Elliott remembers Natalie commenting on how elegant the watch was, while Liam laughs and says it was a little treat for myself. Now Elliott realizes that it was a treat paid for by his credit card. Elliott felt a cramp in his stomach. There may be explanations for all of these, but the simplest explanation is often the correct one. He needs to be sure. Elliott sat in the darkness of his home study that night, those bills in his hands, his stomach churning. As someone who has handled countless construction projects and negotiated complex contracts, he has always prided himself on his calm and analytical skills. But at the moment, his thoughts were chaotic, emotion and reason warring fiercely in his mind. Maybe there are other explanations, he whispered to himself, trying to find one that would keep his world from falling apart. But business instincts, the kind of acumen that has made him invincible in the real estate market, are warning him loud and clear: the numbers don't lie, and a pattern has developed. The next morning, Elliott stumbles upon a text notification on Natalie's cell phone in the bathroom. She was in the shower, and her cell phone was on the sink charging. The screen lit up with a message from L.B. The message: "Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again this weekend. Remember to bring the red one." The message was cut off here. Elliott didn't pick up the phone or try to unlock it. That would have crossed a line he didn't want to cross. But the message deepened the expanding doubts in his mind. Despite his nausea, Elliott took no snooping action, didn't follow her, didn't hack into her equipment, didn't search her belongings. Instead, after calming down, he hires a private investigator, a retired police officer known for his professionalism and discretion, Thomas Garcia, a veteran of countless matrimonial investigations. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Elliott explained in his first meeting with Garcia. "I just wanted to know the truth, no matter how painful it was." Garcia nodded understandingly. "That's what most clients say, Mr. Thorne. But be careful what truth you seek. Once you see something, you can't pretend it's not there anymore. I'd rather face the painful truth than live in the comfort of a lie," Elliott replied, his voice low but firm. 2 weeks later, Garcia handed Elliott an envelope with a blank face. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, then politely left, leaving Elliott private to face the impending blow. Elliott's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The photos inside irrefutably proved his suspicions: of Natalie and Liam walking into the hotel and snuggling intimately, of interlocking fingers in the restaurant, of kissing on the hotel balcony with the Boston skyline behind them. The last photo was of them in the lobby of Liam's luxury apartment building, Natalie's head resting on Liam's shoulder, the two looking cozy and familiar, as if this was the norm. Elliott sat alone in his office, the photos in his hands, and felt a sharp pain penetrate his chest. That pain was quickly replaced by a cold rage he had never experienced before. Throughout his career, he has always been rational, calm, and cautious, never letting emotions get in the way of business decisions. He often evaluates undervalued assets and finds value that others overlook. Now he's the underrated one. Natalie completely misunderstood him, and he began to think about how to correct this misunderstanding completely. That night, he silently accepted another excuse from Natalie, who claimed she needed to attend an emergency marketing meeting. When she leaves, Elliott opens his laptop and begins to research Meridian Visionary's finances. On the surface, the company is ready to go public at an impressive valuation, but Elliott's experience allows him to see past the superficial glitz. His years in the real estate market taught him to look for red flags, indicators that suggest an asset is overvalued or has hidden problems. After spending all night studying the publicly available documents, he began to see some inconsistencies. First, the company's revenue growth doesn't seem to match the size of actual client projects. Second, some of the offshore partnerships appear vague and follow a pattern familiar to him from real estate money laundering schemes. Thirdly, recent financial statements show that a lot of money has been invested in research and development, but the company has hardly launched any new products in recent years. As CFO, Liam Brooks is responsible for any financial misconduct. Elliott wonders if Natalie is in the know, or if her love blinds her as it once blinded him. The next day, Elliott contacted a trusted business attorney and friend from his college days. I needed to understand what it would take to acquire a privately held technology company, he explained, especially one that was ready to go public. It's quite a change, Elliott, the lawyer warned. It's not as simple as buying a building. I know, Elliott replied, his voice calm and firm, but I think it's an underrated opportunity. In the days that followed, Elliott fell into a strange calm. He continues to attend meetings, oversee projects, and even have dinner with Natalie as if everything is normal. But there is a fierce battle going on inside him. Anger and sadness, betrayal and nostalgia, and the strongest of all, determination. Marcus, Elliott's college roommate and longtime friend, was one of the few people who noticed a change in his behavior. "Man, you don't seem right lately," Marcus commented after their weekly Friday basketball game. "Is something wrong?" Elliott hesitated, then handed Marcus a bottle of water. "What would you do if you found out that your entire marriage was a lie?" Marcus looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "You and Natalie." "She and Liam Brooks. It's been months, maybe longer." "That smug finance guy?" Marcus shook his head. "Damn, Elliott, I'm sorry. What are you gonna do? Divorce?" Elliott looks away from the field and ponders for a moment. "I'm thinking about a more comprehensive solution." Marcus shifted uneasily. "Look, I know you're hurting, but don't do anything crazy, okay?" "On the contrary," Elliott said, a tiny smile skimming the corners of his mouth. "I will be more rational and precise than ever." That night, Elliott began researching the corporate structure of Meridian Visionaries. If it was just to punish Liam, he could have simply given the evidence to the company's board or to Natalie. But something deeper drives him, a sense of anger at being grossly underestimated and a strong desire to prove his worth. Elliott learned that while Meridian's founders still hold a majority stake, the company has taken on several rounds of venture capital. Founder Jacob Reynolds, an old-school engineer, is said to be frustrated with the company's increasing focus on finance rather than innovation. Through some discreet questioning and research, Elliott discovers that there are tensions within the company, a growing divide between the technology team and the finance department, and that Liam Brooks is at the center of this conflict. Elliott begins to hatch a plan, but he knows that time is of the essence. Once a company goes public, acquisitions will become more difficult. It would be a costly gamble that would require him to use almost all of his assets and lines of credit. But if successful, the rewards would be enormous, not only financially, but also on a personal level. He first contacted his most trusted financial advisor, Ryan Chen. "You're kidding, right?" Ryan was surprised to hear Elliott's plan and said, "Acquiring a technology company that's ready to go public? This is not your area of expertise, Elliott. It's too risky." "Risk is directly proportional to reward," Elliott replied calmly. "I've looked into their finances. Something not quite right. I think there's room for profit." Ryan sighed, knowing he couldn't shake Elliott's resolve. "Well, if you're sure you want to do this, we need to move with extreme caution. First of all, you can't appear as an individual on any document." Elliott nodded in agreement. "I've thought of that. We need a shell company." "Not only that," Ryan added, "but we need multiple layers of legal entities to make sure that even if someone tries to track down a buyer, they're going to run into a wall of legal labyrinthine." He began quietly approaching investors with an offer to buy their shares at a price slightly higher than the expected IPO valuation. Meanwhile, he set up a shell company called Phoenix Acquisitions, hiding his identity as the real buyer through multiple layers of legal entities. The process was extraordinarily complex and required Elliott to mobilize almost all of his resources and contacts. He sold 2 lucrative properties, converted most of his portfolio into liquidity, and even borrowed from a few trusted business partners. Each step must be carried out carefully to avoid arousing suspicion or exposing his plans in front of Natalie. During the process, Elliott worked closely with several financial and legal experts, including a former SEC investigator specializing in corporate financial fraud, Sarah Donovan. She helped Elliott delve into Meridian's financial statements and SEC filings. The numbers look pretty, but if you know what to look for, you'll find some incongruities, Sarah noted in a late-night meeting, pointing to a couple of dubious accounts, especially these R&D expenditures and certain overseas partnerships. If I were still in the SEC, I'd be flagging these. Enough to constitute a case of fraud? Elliott asked. Sarah replied cautiously, that alone is not enough. But it provides enough reason for a more in-depth investigation, especially of those offshore accounts. If you gain control, you can authorize a full audit. Next, he arranged a private meeting with Jacob Reynolds. To avoid arousing suspicion, the meeting took place in a quiet cafe away from Boston's financial district. The older engineer, a tall, thin man with sharp eyes and a simple plaid shirt, was very different from Elliott's imagined image of a tech company founder. Jacob eyed Elliott warily. Why would a real estate developer be interested in buying a tech company? Because we actually have a lot in common, Mr. Reynolds, Elliott replied. We're both builders. You build the technology to solve problems. I build the space to change communities. We're all focused on long-term value rather than short-term gain. Elliott candidly continues, I'm not a technical expert, but I am experienced in revitalizing undervalued assets. I believe Meridian's core value lies not in its stock pricing, but in its potential for innovation. I wanted to provide an opportunity to bring the company back to its fundamental mission rather than just being another tool of Wall Street. Jacob listened quietly, his fingers tapping on his coffee cup. How did you learn about the inside of Meridian? There are rumors in the market, Elliott replied cautiously, and I have friends in the tech industry. I've heard that the direction of the company has changed. To his surprise, Jacob let out a long sigh, seemingly relieving himself of a burden he'd been carrying for a long time. Since Liam Brooks and his team took over the finance department, the soul of the company is being lost, he admits. Originally, we were there to change the world, but now all we seem to care about is quarterly earnings and stock options. That's what I want to change, Elliott says, with genuine enthusiasm in his voice, to get back to innovating and solving real problems, not just pleasing analysts. Jacob's expression turned serious when Elliott gently mentioned some financial anomalies he's discovered, careful not to reveal all he knows. I've always had my suspicions, Jacob whispered, tapping his fingers nervously on the desktop, especially about those so-called research and development programs that consume a lot of money with no output. But the finance department kept saying that I didn't understand modern accounting, that I was an old-school engineer who didn't understand modern business operations. Maybe it's time for an outsider to come in and take a look. Jacob looked up with a firm gaze. If I agree to this proposal, I'll need your assurances that the company will return to a mission centered on innovation and solving real environmental problems. You have my word, Elliott replied, holding out his hand, and I'll make sure any misbehavior is exposed and dealt with. At the end of the meeting, Elliott made a bold offer. If Jacob was willing to sell his shares, Elliott would guarantee that the company would return to its original mission and conduct a thorough investigation of any misconduct discovered. I need to think about it, Jacob said, but Elliott could tell his offer resonated. Over the next few weeks, Elliott carefully moves forward with his plans while continuing to play his usual role at home. Natalie's behavior becomes increasingly abusive, constantly belittling his accomplishments and mocking his mediocrity. Do you know how much money Liam made last year? Over 7 figures, she bragged at a dinner. And you're still busy with old buildings that nobody cares about. Elliott just nodded. We each have our own strengths. That's the problem, she said sarcastically. You have no strengths, Elliott. You just exist. Those words stung him like a knife, but they also strengthened his resolve. When Jacob finally agreed to sell his shares, Elliott had secured enough support from other investors to enable him to gain control of the company. The acquisition was done in strict confidence, and even most of Meridian's executives don't know who the real buyer is. Then it's Elliott's 40th birthday, which Natalie almost forgets about until their friend Diana reminds her. She hastily arranged a small gathering, apparently out of obligation rather than caring. Then there was the poor, expired gift certificate, accompanied by cruel words in front of all my friends. As Elliott cuts the birthday cake, he prepared himself. His cell phone vibrates. It was a text from his lawyer. The document has been signed. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, you officially become a controlling shareholder of Meridian Visionaries. Board meetings have been scheduled. Elliott calmly put his cell phone back in his pocket and smiled at the room. He was finally ready to reveal that he wasn't who they thought he was, especially for Natalie. Later that night, after the party, Natalie announced that she needed to go back to the office to take care of some paperwork. Elliott just nodded, knowing she was going to see Liam. When she left, he went into his study and opened his laptop to check the details of his plan one last time. Tomorrow, the butterflies will flap their wings and everything will change. During the final stages of the acquisition process, Elliott experienced a series of nearly sleepless days and nights. During the day, he continued to manage his real estate projects and acted like it was business as usual. In the evenings, he meets with lawyers, financial advisors, and investigators to carefully plan every detail. Late at night, alone in his study, he reviewed documents, weighed the risks, and thought about every possible scenario. The hardest part of the whole process was keeping up the appearance of calm in front of Natalie. He had to suppress the anger and pain he felt whenever she mentioned Liam or her upcoming work trips. Whenever she commented on his work or clothing in a dismissive tone, he had to restrain the urge to fight back. His most trusted friend Marcus is worried about his health. "You look awful," Marcus said bluntly during one of their rare lunch meetings. "Was it worth it, Elliott? This revenge plan consumes you too much." Elliott looked up at his friend with a strange calmness in his eyes. "It's not just revenge, Marcus. It's about justice, about holding everyone accountable for their choices, including me. I'm just worried that ultimately this will hurt you more," Marcus sighed. "Maybe," Elliott admitted, gently shaking his coffee cup, "but I have to walk this road. Otherwise, I will always wonder if I had the courage to face the truth." The final negotiations for the acquisition took place in a secluded law firm conference room and lasted a full 18 hours. As the last document was signed, Elliott felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. There is no turning back from what has happened. It was 3 in the morning when Natalie slipped home. She stepped gingerly into the bedroom, careful not to wake Elliott. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, outlining her silhouette, which carried the unfamiliar scent of perfume and a faint whiskey. Elliott lay with his back to the door, his eyes open, staring at the shadows on the wall, his breathing deliberately even and calm. "You're back," he said calmly, without turning around. Natalie stiffened, her hand stopping in midair as she was about to take off her jacket. "I thought you were sleeping." "It's hard to fall asleep when your wife isn't around." His voice was quiet and carried no trace of accusation, a control that was the result of weeks of careful practice. "I told you I had a job," she immediately defended, a hint of panic in her voice, "and the IPO deadline dash." "I know," Elliott interrupted her, still calm. "You should rest. Tomorrow is a big day." Natalie frowned in the darkness. "What big day?" "Board meeting. Something about the company being acquired." She took a breath. "How did you know?" "This is classified information." Elliott finally turned to me, his face disturbingly calm in the moonlight. "I'm just guessing. Looks like I was right." Before she could say anything, he rolled over and ended the conversation. Natalie stood there, confused but too tired to think about it in detail. She quietly climbed into bed, keeping the maximum distance between them. Early in the morning, Elliott got up earlier than usual. He wore a seldom-used couture suit, a dark gray three-piece suit, specially tailored for the opening of a major project he worked on a few years ago. He chose a dark blue tie and carefully tied the Windsor knot. When he walked into the kitchen, Natalie was hurriedly sipping her coffee, already dressed and ready to go out. "You're dressed formally today," she commented, her eyes scanning his attire with the first hint of confusion. "Anything in particular?" "Just an important meeting," he replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "About an acquisition I've been waiting for." "Oh." She looked relieved, apparently thinking it was none of her business. "Well, good luck with that. I've got to go. The board meeting starts at 9 and Liam needs my help preparing some data." Elliott smiled. "I also happen to have a meeting at 9. Maybe we can exchange a few words about our respective days tonight. Natalie responded vaguely, already flipping through her phone absent-mindedly. Yeah, sure. They drove off separately. Elliott made sure to keep his distance and let Natalie reach the office first. He needed her and all the key players in place to make an appearance. Meridian Visionaries is headquartered in a gleaming glass building in Boston's financial district. Elliott parked in the visitor's space and walked to the front desk. Elliott Thorne, he said to the receptionist, attend the 9 o'clock board meeting. The receptionist looked surprised. Oh, of course, Mr. Thorne. We didn't expect you to attend in person. This way, please. This reaction tells Elliott that word of the takeover has spread, but his identity remains a secret. Perfect. He was guided into a spacious conference room with large glass windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Board members and executives were already seated, talking in hushed tones. Natalie is sitting at the far end and is whispering to Liam, the two of them close together. When Elliott walks in, the room goes quiet and all eyes turn to him. The blood faded from Natalie's face instantly. What's going on? She blurted out. Elliott, what are you doing here? The company's legal counsel cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Mr. Elliott Thorne, CEO of Phoenix Acquisitions and the new controlling shareholder of our company. The room erupted into murmurs of surprise. Liam's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Good morning, Elliott said calmly, walking toward the empty seats at the front end of the conference table. And thank you all for coming at this important time. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering briefly on Natalie's shocked face before continuing. I'm sure most people are surprised at who I am. Let me clarify. Phoenix Acquisitions is an investment vehicle I created specifically for this acquisition. My primary business is Thorne Development Group, a real estate development company focused on sustainable urban renewal. I don't understand. One board member spoke up. Why a real estate developer would want to acquire a technology company? Elliott smiles. Because I believe in underrated potential. For the past 15 years, I've been identifying overlooked assets and helping them realize their true value. Meridian has the potential for extraordinary innovation, but I think the company's recent financial strategy has strayed from its core mission. Liam stirred uneasily. That sounds like a criticism of my department. More than just criticism, Mr. Brooks, Elliott replied, his voice sharpening. During the due diligence period of the acquisition process, our financial experts uncovered some serious irregularities. He gestured for one of the men standing in the doorway to come forward, a serious, middle-aged lady with a folder in her hand. This is Ms. Rivera, a forensic accountant. Her team has reviewed all financial records for the past 3 years. Ms. Rivera, please brief the board on your findings. Over the next 15 minutes, Ms. Rivera detailed a series of financial irregularities, inflated revenue projections, hidden expenses, and worst of all, evidence of the transfer of company funds to several shell companies through fictitious research and development projects. Liam's face became paler and paler with each accusation. Natalie, for her part, swings back and forth between shock and fear, her eyes darting between Elliott and Liam. When Ms. Rivera concluded her report, Elliott spoke again. Based on these findings, my first action was to immediately terminate Liam Brooks' employment and notify the appropriate authorities for further investigation. You can't do this. Liam stood up suddenly, his voice quivering. This is slander. Elliott calmly responded. All evidence has been documented and verified by an independent third party. You can defend yourself in court, Mr. Brooks. He turned to a quiet older director. Mr. Reynolds, as the founder of the company, I would like to ask you to reassume the CFO position on an interim basis until we can find a suitable replacement. Your past financial background and deep knowledge of the company make you the ideal candidate. Jacob Reynolds nods slowly, a look of relief appearing on his face. Natalie finally found her voice. Elliott, what's going on? We need to talk privately. Elliott turned to her, his expression becoming soft but firm. Natalie, I think it's best if you take the rest of the day off. In light of your association with Mr. Brooks' close relationship, and will investigate your potential involvement in these financial irregularities. The room was silent. Everyone turns to Natalie, her face reddening. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice trembling with anger. I'm sure everyone in the room understands what I mean, Elliott replied calmly. If you don't mind, I'll have security escort you out of the building. Your email access has been temporarily frozen pending investigation. Liam sprints for the door, but two suited security guards are already in position. Elliott shook his head. Don't make it worse, Mr. Brooks. The police are already waiting in the lobby, and they have some questions for you about those offshore accounts. As Liam was escorted out, Natalie stood up with anger and fear in her eyes. How dare you humiliate me like that? Do you know how much I've given to this company? I am fully aware of your paying, Elliott replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. Just as I'm well aware of your paying for our marriage. Natalie's face turns pale, finally realizing that Elliott knows about her and Liam. Her mouth was open, unable to respond. Elliott turned to the rest of the board. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we take a 1-hour recess to give everyone time to digest this information. After that, I'd like to discuss a new direction for the company, returning to Jacob's original vision, to develop truly innovative, sustainable technology solutions rather than just pursuing short-term profits. With the meeting dismissed, Elliott walked to the window overlooking the city. He should feel triumphant, but inside he felt a strange emptiness. The sweetness of revenge wasn't as sweet as he thought it would be. Natalie came to him one last time, her voice low and sharp. You ruined my life. Elliott turned to face her. No, Natalie. You betrayed our lives. I'm just exposing the truth. The birthday party the other night. You already know everything. Yes. And you let me go on. Like you let me continue to believe that our marriage was real. Elliott replied calmly. Natalie shook her head, tears finally streaming down her face. I don't understand. How did you always been? A middle manager? Worthless. Elliott says gently. People tend to see only what they want to see. You're seeing the excuses you want so you don't have to feel guilty. But acquiring a company, it costs millions of dollars. There was disbelief in Natalie's voice. Elliott smiled slightly. I've never needed to show off my success. I made over 7 figures in profit on my first project, but you never cared about the details. I reinvested the profits in new projects while building a sizable portfolio. Over the past 5 years, my firm has completed 12 major projects totaling over $300 million. Natalie's jaw almost dropped, but you never talk about that. Your car, your clothes. Because those things don't matter, Natalie. I value the value I create, not the wealth I display. Elliott sighed. Ironically, that's what you married me for. Then you changed, or we all did. The security guard came to the door and waited to escort her out. Our lawyers will be in touch, Elliott said, his voice regaining its professional composure. And I suggest you get yourself a good lawyer. Elliott felt an unexpected pang of sadness as security escorted Natalie away. It wasn't because he'd lost her that kind of loss had happened back when she'd betrayed him. Rather, it's because he realizes that his carefully orchestrated revenge hasn't brought the satisfaction he'd hoped for. Late in the afternoon, after a series of meetings, Elliott returned to his empty home. Most of Natalie's personal belongings are missing. She must have sent someone. He walked toward the bar, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and walked out onto their, and now his, bedroom balcony. The Boston skyline shimmers in the setting sun, beautiful and cold. His cell phone received a steady stream of messages. Updates from lawyers about upcoming legal proceedings, emails from the press requesting comment, and even text messages from several board members expressing support. But none of it came from friends or family. He realizes that in his quest for vengeance, he has become estranged from them. Revenge is a lonely pursuit. The Boston financial community was in a state of shock after the board meeting. The turmoil within Meridian quickly made headlines in the business news. Reporters scrambled to cover the dramatic story, the arrest of the CFO of a well-respected tech company on suspicion of serious financial fraud, the company's sudden acquisition by a little-known real estate developer, and all sorts of rumors about misconduct within the company. Elliott avoids the media spotlight, delegating a company spokesperson to handle all external communications. He immersed himself in the daunting task of reorganizing the company, working closely with Jacob Reynolds in an effort to stabilize employees and re-establish the company's mission. People are afraid of change, Jacob told him after a lengthy strategy session, especially after this kind of chaos. They need stability and clear direction. Elliott nods in agreement. We need to get back to basics, refocus on innovation and solving real problems. Financial growth should be the result of these efforts, not the only goal. At the same time, Elliott hired a prominent forensic accounting firm to conduct a thorough audit of all of the company's transactions over the past 5 years. Every day brings new discoveries, hidden accounts, forged contracts, inflated revenue projections. As the investigation deepened, Liam's fraudulent network became increasingly complex, involving multiple shell companies in multiple countries. A few days later, the legal machine was in full swing. Liam faces serious criminal charges with strong evidence: wire fraud, securities fraud, falsification of business records, tax fraud, and even money laundering charges. The FBI took over the case, treating it as a major financial crime. At the preliminary hearing, prosecutors presented shocking evidence describing an elaborate scheme designed to siphon millions of dollars from the company through fictitious projects. Liam's attorneys are already seeking a plea bargain in hopes of reducing his sentence. While Natalie was not directly involved in the financial fraud, the investigation revealed that she was aware of some of the irregularities but chose to remain silent. To make matters worse, the evidence showed that she used inside information to make several lucrative stock trades, which could constitute insider trading. The Securities and Exchange Commission has launched an investigation into her. Her career is ruined and her reputation is crumbling. Elliott maintained an amazingly calm and professional demeanor throughout the chaos. At the company, he focused on stabilizing the business and restoring employee confidence. In public, he behaved decently and declined to comment on the ongoing investigation. It's only in the dead of night, when he's alone in an empty room in his home, that he allows himself to feel the true effects of his revenge, not only on Natalie and Liam, but on himself as well. 2 weeks later, Elliott received the first draft of the divorce papers. His attorney assured him it would be a clean process, and given the circumstances, Natalie had little room to bargain. The attorney recommended a tough stance, taking into account her infidelity and the legal issues she could face. "We can ask her to relinquish almost all of her property interests," the lawyer advised, "and the judge will be on your side." Elliott ponders for a moment, then shakes his head gently. "I don't want to hurt her more than necessary. Make sure the process is fair, but not overly difficult. I want to end this relationship with honor." The lawyer looks surprised. "She betrayed you, Elliott. Many times." "I know," Elliott replied calmly, gazing out the window at the cityscape. "But I don't want revenge to define who I am. Enough already." That same day, Jacob Reynolds came to see him for coffee. The two met at a small cafe near the office, away from the hustle and bustle and gossip of the office. "You know," the old man said, his eyes sparkling with new vigor, his fingers tapping his coffee cup, "for the first time since all these changes, I feel like the company is back on track. Engineers are once again excited to talk about projects instead of worrying about the stock price. Yesterday, the R&D team showed me a prototype of their new water filtration system that removes microplastics. They've been working on it in secret for months, but were afraid to bring it up under the old management because it was too long a road to commercialization." Elliott nodded, the corners of his mouth turning up slightly. "That's what I was hoping for. Innovation shouldn't always be about immediate profits. Sometimes the most important progress takes time and patience." Jacob studied his face, his eyes keen. "But you're not happy." Elliott, slightly surprised, puts down his coffee cup. "It's not about being happy," he replies, his voice low. "It's about being right." "Ah." Jacob laughed softly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Revenge seldom brings the satisfaction we expect, does it? I see something familiar in your eyes, the emptiness of victory." Elliott looked at him in surprise. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to those who have also traveled this road," Jacob replied, with the wisdom of years in his voice. "I was once a young man, Elliott. I founded Meridian not only to develop clean technology, but also to prove wrong the big company executives who laughed at my ideas. When our first big project was a success, I sent out a press release to every company that had ever turned me down. I thought that would feel good. But no," Elliott guessed. "No," Jacob confirmed, shaking his head gently. "That satisfaction is fleeting. Then I realized I was wasting too much energy on past hurts instead of future possibilities. I, too, have pursued the justice I thought I deserved. But in the end, true peace comes from moving forward, not dwelling on past hurts." Is that why you finally agreed to sell the company? Elliott asked, letting go. Jacob thought for a moment. Partly. I realized that my mission was not to prove people wrong, but to solve real problems. When I saw the company straying from that mission, I knew a change was needed. When you came to me, I saw the same passion in you, not just a desire for business success, but a thirst for creating something meaningful. Despite my motives, not exactly pure, Elliott admits. Few people's motives are completely pure, Jacob smiles. But what matters is the path we ultimately choose. They finished their coffee in silence, and Elliott pondered the words. Jacob's simple wisdom touches something deep inside him, a desire not only to get revenge or prove himself, but to create something of real value. We have a board meeting next week, Elliott eventually said, pulling the conversation back to business. And I'd like to discuss increasing the R&D budget. Jacob laughed. That's what I wanted to hear. That night, he received an unexpected text message from Natalie. Can we talk? Not about the law or money. Just talk. Elliott stared at his cell phone screen for a long time. The sweetness of revenge has turned to ashes. He got everything he wanted, to prove his power, to punish those who misjudged him, to regain control. But at what cost? He began typing a reply. Where and when? A week later, they met in a neutral place, a quiet cafe, far from where their mutual friends and acquaintances might be. Natalie looked much older, with deep dark circles under her eyes and her once shiny blonde hair now dull. Thank you for being willing to see me, she spoke, her voice hoarse. I know I don't deserve this. Elliott nodded and waited for her to continue. I wanted to explain, she said, not to justify my actions, but to understand them. What I fell in love with when we met was your honesty and authenticity. You're not hypocritical or pompous like others I've met. She paused, staring at her coffee. But as time went on, I began to be influenced by the people in the company and their lifestyle. Everyone talks about their house, their car, their vacation. I began to feel insufficient. Not because we don't have those things, but because you don't seem to want them. I wanted something different, Elliott said quietly. I know, she nodded. But I can no longer appreciate those things for what they are worth. Then Liam came along, and he represented everything I was beginning to crave: status, power, recognition. I told myself it was just professional admiration, but it turned into so much more. She lifted her head and looked Elliott straight in the eye. I was already too far in when I found out about his financial fraud. I tell myself it's not my responsibility. I'm just the marketing department. But I knew it was wrong and I chose to ignore it. Why are you telling me this? Elliott asked. Because you deserve to know the truth, she replied. Not so that you can forgive me, but because you've always been the one who valued the truth. And I've become the kind of person I once despised, polished on the outside, empty on the inside. They sat in silence for a while, both contemplating how they had gotten this far. I don't hate you, Natalie, Elliott said finally. I used to, but that feeling is gone. Now I feel nothing but sadness for what we might have had. That might be harder to bear than hate, she whispered, her voice barely audible. When they parted, both knew it was the last time they would see each other. The divorce will continue, and their lives will move along different paths. A few months later, Elliott stood at the launch of Meridian Visionary's newly patented sustainable water treatment system. The company flourished under his leadership, refocusing on innovation rather than financial engineering. Jacob stood by, tears of pride in his eyes as he watched the idea he'd had 10 years ago finally come to fruition. The room was packed with journalists and industry experts, all curious about a company that had been embroiled in scandal and was now reborn. Elliott maintains a low-key but confident demeanor, attributing most of the accolades to the engineering team. After the launch, a reporter stopped Elliott as he was about to leave. Mr. Thorne, given Meridian's past, how do you ensure that the company doesn't make the same mistakes? Elliott thought for a moment before answering. By remembering our core mission, to create technology that actually improves lives, not just increases profits. When profit is the only goal, people make dangerous compromises. As he walks toward the parking lot, his phone vibrates, displaying a message from his attorney that Liam Brooks has been sentenced to 7 years in prison and fined millions of dollars. On the same day, a settlement was reached in the SEC's investigation of Natalie. She was barred from holding executive positions in public companies and fined $150,000. Elliott stood beside the car, staring at the screen of his cell phone, waiting for the expected joy of victory. But it didn't come. Instead, he felt only a heaviness, a regret for the waste of time and relationships. His plan for revenge has been executed to perfection, and everyone who betrayed him has paid the price. But the taste of victory is surprisingly bitter. That night, he was alone on the balcony of his new apartment overlooking Boston Harbor. Since his divorce, he sold the memory-filled townhouse and moved into a minimalist, modern apartment. The room echoed with emptiness, a reminder of the price he had paid for his revenge. His phone vibrated again, this time with a news alert. He clicked on the link and saw a little article about Natalie. The report mentions that she has moved to the West Coast to work for a small nonprofit organization focused on providing clean water to underprivileged communities. The article quotes her as saying, "My past has taught me the emptiness of money and status. Now I want to do something really meaningful." Elliott stared at the passage, pondering whether she was genuinely remorseful or whether this was just another PR gesture. In any case, she also seems to be seeking some kind of redemption. A few days later, Elliott received an unexpected package by courier. Inside was an old notebook and a brief note in handwriting he immediately recognized as Natalie's. "Found this while organizing my stuff. It belongs to you." N. Elliott flips through the notebook and recognizes it as the one he used to keep track of project ideas in the early days of their marriage. It's full of sketches, calculations, and visions of community projects. At the time, he was idealistic and believed in the power of architecture to change lives, a vision that Natalie fully supported at. In the center of the notebook, sandwiched between them, was a photo from their wedding in Maine. The two stood on a rocky shoreline, smiles wide in anticipation of the future shining in their eyes. Elliott remembers the promises they made that day, those promises about building a meaningful life together. He gently closed the notebook and a tear fell on the cover. The next day, he came to the office, energized and with renewed determination. In the conference room, he announced a bold new direction to the team. Meridian would partner with his real estate company to develop a pilot project to build self-sufficient eco-homes in low-income neighborhoods in Boston, integrating the company's latest sustainable technologies. "It's not just about profit," he explained to the surprised team. "It's about proving that our technology can truly change lives. If successful, we will create a model that can be replicated across the country, even globally." Jacob was the first to applaud, and soon the whole team was filled with excitement. Elliott put his phone back in his pocket and turned to face his team and their new project. The path of vengeance didn't lead to the fulfillment he had hoped for, but perhaps the path of rebuilding would make more sense. His marriage can't be fixed, but other things can: neglected buildings, misguided companies, even his own broken heart. 2 years later, the Elliott Thorne eco-housing program completed its first phase, garnering national media attention. This innovative program integrates advanced sustainable technologies into affordable housing, providing dozens of families with shelter that is both environmentally friendly and affordable. The success of the project led to new investment and partnership opportunities, and Elliott found himself standing at an unexpected turning point. At the inauguration of the project, he saw a familiar figure standing at the back of the crowd. Natalie, with her hair shorter than it used to be, wore simple professional clothes instead of the designer outfits she used to love. Their eyes met briefly, and she nodded her head softly in greeting before leaving quietly. That night, Elliott received an email from her. "I am proud to see you realize the vision we had discussed. I've been following the progress of Meridian and the way you're integrating the technology with community development. My work in San Francisco has opened my eyes to the importance of clean water and sustainable housing for vulnerable communities. Maybe someday our organizations can work together. I wish you all the best. Natalie." Elliott gazed longingly at the screen, contemplating the marvelous twist of fate. Their marriage ended in betrayal and vengeance, but from the ashes, both seemed to have found a truer self and purpose. It wasn't how he imagined it would end. In the dark days of the revenge program, he had fantasized about Natalie and Liam being miserable and regretful forever. But the reality is more complex. People adapt, grow, and sometimes even find redemption from failure. As he begins his presentation on the new program, Elliott doesn't talk about the past, but focuses on the future. This is his true gift, seeing overlooked potential, not only in buildings and businesses, but also in people and relationships. Maybe someday he'll rediscover that potential in his own life. A month later, Elliott received unexpected news. Liam Brooks died in prison of a heart attack. News reports say he has shown signs of repentance in the past few months and has even begun teaching financial literacy to young inmates, warning them not to follow his path. The news brought a mix of emotions to Elliott. His vengeance ends up causing the death of a man, not directly, but he can't completely brush off the blame. The ultimate price of revenge was much higher than he thought. In this contemplation, Elliott reevaluates various aspects of his life. His plan for revenge worked. He proved his power and intelligence by destroying Natalie and Liam's lives. But the victory was hollow, leaving only regret and reflection. He decided to create a foundation focused on providing education and resources on ethical business practices for entrepreneurs and small businesses. The foundation's motto is integrity and innovation, and it aims to foster a business culture that prioritizes ethical values over short-term gains. At the foundation's launch, Elliott gave a brief but insightful speech that did not mention his personal experiences, but was clearly influenced by them. The true measure of success is not how much wealth or power we accumulate, but how we use those resources to create positive change. Past mistakes, both our own and those of others, can be the basis for wiser decisions in the future. But today, the ashes of vengeance remain bitter, a poignant reminder of the lasting cost of betrayal, not only to the betrayed, but to the betrayer and to those who choose vengeance as a response. There are no real winners, only losers of varying degrees and painful lessons about the fragile nature of human beings. In private moments, Elliott still ponders the choices he made. He could have simply divorced, started over, kept his dignity, and avoided getting caught up in the whirlwind of revenge. But anger and hurt drove him down a darker path. His mother used to say the old proverb that he who digs a pit of vengeance should dig two, one for his enemy and one for himself. Elliott now understands the wisdom of this statement. In his calculated revenge, he destroys not only Natalie and Liam's lives, but also a part of himself that he once held dear, that pure idealism and kindness that used to be his most central quality. Sometimes the loss is more precious than the vengeance gained. Betrayal is painful, but revenge often only brings deeper loneliness and emptiness. Forgiveness and moving forward can be the more difficult, but ultimately more rewarding path. It was a lesson Elliott had learned at great cost, a lesson he wished he'd understood sooner, before he'd let the flames of vengeance consume his judgment. As he turns off the lights in his office and stands at the window overlooking the city lights, Elliott ponders the fragile nature of human relationships and how easily we can hurt those closest to us. Perhaps his greatest regret is not the loss of Natalie, or even his plans for revenge, but the fact that both of them have forgotten the purity and sincerity that initially bound them together. That's something that can't be retrieved through revenge. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.